Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. My guest today has an ambition to support the European institutions in becoming more effective, transparent and accountable. Emily O'Reilly heads the EU Ombudsman, which promotes good administrative practices, although it doesn't have the legal powers of, say, the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Transparency is a big issue, and not just because of the alleged bribery scandal known as Qatargate. Pressure is also building on the EU Commission chief to explain exactly what happened in the run-up to a major contract that the EU signed with pharmaceutical companies Pfizer and BioNTech for a coronavirus vaccine during the pandemic. Emily O'Reilly has headed the Ombudsman since 2013 and was re-elected for a second 5-year term in 2019. In a previous career, she was an award-winning journalist in Ireland. She joins me from Strasbourg. Emily O'Reilly, thank you so much for being my guest. And just quickly, should I be calling you Ombudswoman or person? Maybe we can just get that right first.
Whatever you choose. If I had €1 for every time I was asked that question, I would be a very rich person indeed. But Ombudswoman is absolutely fine, or indeed Ombudsman, which is the legal title.
Not an original question then. So let's talk about Qatargate. You've said that the new ethics body that is now being proposed actually by the European Parliament should have powers of investigation and sanctions. Do you think things are heading in that direction?
Rhetorically, perhaps. Realistically, perhaps not. It's not just down to the Parliament. I mean, we've heard a lot of talk over the last few weeks, ever since what's called Qatargate, burst onto the scene. But it also needs the Commission to come on board, and it also needs the Council, the Member States to come on board. And I mean, this isn't a new idea. This was first proposed and indeed accepted by President von der Leyen at the Commission 2 years ago in 2019. And very little has happened then. And the Parliament put forward a proposal which was a weakened proposal from what had initially been proposed. The sounds from the Commission said they weren't that happy with it. They want an advisory board. We don't know what the Council thinks, but on past form, there'll be pushback from them. So whatever emerges will take a long time to emerge, and whether it will be the sort of pure investigative independent body that people have talked about, or that we've heard, as I said, rhetorically, that remains to be seen.
And I mean, so far the proposal from Roberta Metsola, the President of the Parliament, has this 3-3-3 formula. So 3 members from the Commission, 3 members from the Parliament, and 3 former judges for this new ethics body. Does that sound to you like too many insiders?
Well, it's a good question, because, I mean, there is a body sort of resembling that in the Commission. It's called the Ad Hoc Ethical Committee, I think, and it has 3 insiders, I think, 1 from Parliament, 1 from the Court and 1 from the Commission, if I'm right. It's called an independent body, but in truth it isn't independent because they do not have the power on their own initiative to investigate matters. In other words, it has to wait for the Commission to ask it to investigate before it can go ahead. So if it reads something in the media, if it hears something about it, wants to investigate, it can't unless it's specifically asked to do so. It is just 3 members. We have actually called for more members, but not from the institutions necessarily, but representing a wider swathe of society, of civil society, whatever, so that you can have different perspectives and not just institutional perspectives.
You touched on transparency at other EU institutions. I know one of your big battles has been opening up access to documents at the European Council, for example, before EU summits. Has your office, the Ombudsman, made any progress with the EU Council on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, the Council, first of all, it said it wasn't its responsibility. We're talking about sponsorship here. I think we didn't call for the sponsorship to be stopped, but we did say that it needed to be transparent because, the concern is obviously that whoever is doing the sponsoring does have particular influence within the council or within whoever is presiding over the council, and that's not good for public trust and for transparency generally.
On the question of the contract between the EU and Pfizer and BioNTech, last July your office found that the refusal by Ursula von der Leyen to release the text messages that she exchanged with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla about purchasing billions of COVID vaccine doses amounted to maladministration. So what have you been doing since then to bring these murky dealings to light?
Well, what we specifically asked for was to sort of, let us know if they're there and produce them and then see whether they could be released. I mean, we weren't saying release them immediately. Obviously, there are rules in relation to release and certain interests that have to be protected. But we basically were stonewalled by the Commission, and, they still really haven't even admitted that they exist. But it's clear that they do. And Mr. Bourla, who's the head of Pfizer, subsequently written a book, and he said that, effectively, part of the informal negotiations in relation to the ultimate purchasing of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines were done through, this sort of informal contacts, emails, WhatsApps with Madame von der Leyen, the President of the Commission. But I think the main problem with this is that it has hung over the Commission and President von der Leyen since April 2021 when this was first reported, and it rears up every now and then. We're talking about it now, for example. And I think it would have been better for the Commission to be as open as possible about those texts. I mean, are they there? Have they been deleted? Whatever. Just give us the reason and the rationale for what happened. Because if you don't do that, then it just causes more problems. I mean, it allows a false narrative to be created about, secrecy within the EU. It allows people who are anti-vax or anti the EU, hostile to the EU, to paint an unfair narrative of what happens within the EU. And therefore, I think the Commission has a responsibility, even if this is a sensitive and difficult issue politically, to come clean, because you're talking about the trust of the citizens in relation to a very important issue.
Should Ursula von der Leyen appear then before MEPs?
Well, that's entirely up to her. My understanding is she's been invited and that she's agreed to do that. I think that's appropriate. It's a forum, but I'm not going to dictate to her what she should do.
Your office investigates maladministration in the first instance. Examples where bad administrative practices have been suspected. But by your own admission, most of your inquiries end up finding that no maladministration has taken place. I just wonder if that perhaps lowers the incentive for citizens to lodge complaints.
Well, no, I think it shows that in general the administration works very well. And we don't find maladministration in most cases. But I mean, we do make, even if we don't find maladministration, we do make suggestions for improvement and so on, and make sure that they are carried out. But I think that, my office, I think the biggest impact is to sort of highlight the sort of issues that we are talking about now and raise the administrative consciousness about the importance of these issues, whether they be, the sort of ethical issues like, conflicts of interest, revolving doors, all of these things, which can, I mean, I know we're talking in the context of the alleged corruption in Qatargate, but there are other forms of more subtle corruption that happen as well, and that aren't quite as graphic as what we've seen over the last number of weeks. So I think the Commission has to be very mindful that these sort of ethical issues are also very important, and I think what my office has done through just the investigation of these complaints is to increase the consciousness of why it is important to get these sort of issues dealt with.
Do you think your office needs more powers, ultimately, perhaps powers of enforcement in some way?
No, I don't. And I think that, if it were the case that it was felt that my office needed more powers, that would be a big admission of failure by the European administration. In a well-operating administration, the vast majority, in fact, almost every Ombudsman's recommendation should be accepted, and that is a measure of the quality of the administration. And I think unless recommendations that I make are completely ill-judged, irrational, whatever, they should be accepted. I mean, I think, you know, this works only when there is an acceptance by the administration of the role of an ombudsman in the architecture of the administration, and when my office in turn works independently and effectively, which I believe we do.
I mentioned in my introduction that you had a very distinguished career as a journalist in Ireland, and obviously, as we all know, former journalists many of them like to opine on a lot of different topics, and I just wondered, with that hat on, what you think of the latest developments around Brexit, and whether you think that the Northern Ireland Protocol is going to be the object of a deal. Do you think there is a landing space for a deal now?
Yeah, I think there's willingness there. I think with the Sunak government, I think they just want to get it off the table because it's a headache for them. Obviously, there are political sensitivities in Northern Ireland, political sensitivities in the Republic as well, but I think there's a willingness to do it. However, I think on a larger level, I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse emerging in the UK in relation to Brexit. I mean, you see even newspapers like The Telegraph, which would have been pro-Brexit, the sort of centre-right, right-leaning newspapers are now beginning to scratch their heads and wonder whether it was all worth it. So we'll see what happens over the next few months or years.
And just a final point on that, Leo Varadkar says that that the EU could show a bit of flexibility as well, which seems a sort of slight change in tone from when the previous British government was Prime Minister was in place. Do you share that? Do you think the EU could show some sort of flexibility too?
There's kind of creeping trust now in the new government, and I think that will help the EU to get off the fence in which it is on. And I think if there's political trust and if there is a political willingness to get this sorted, then it certainly will be. And I think, the signs are better than they have been for quite a while.
Thank you so much for your insights. Emily O'Reilly, European Ombudswoman, joining me from Strasbourg. And don't go away, I'll be back after the news with my panel of MEPs from the European Parliament, and we'll be talking more about some of these transparency issues, particularly the Qatargate scandal.